I've made it no secret that Fire Emblem is my favorite video game series ever. It is debatably the most recognized strategy RPG catalog, and I personally feel that is for good reason. Not only do they offer compelling and complex gameplay systems, but they all manage to present them in an accessible and appealing way. There are many studios out there that would seem to agree, as Fire Emblem has seen a fair number of imitators over the years. One of those has even come about very recently, in the form of Lost Eidolons. Lost Eidolons? What do you mean you lost them? They're right here, idiot! Now, when I say that Lost Eidolons is an imitation of Fire Emblem, I don't mean that disingenuously. After all, turn-based adventure JRPGs are my favorite genre of video games. What is Wild Arms if not an imitation of Final Fantasy? And what is Final Fantasy if not an imitation of Dragon Quest? Games are allowed to be inspired by the previous works that came before them. When gazing upon the offerings of Lost Eidolons, its inspirations become very clear. While this game borrows ideas from across the entire Fire Emblem series, it is most heavily influenced by Fire Emblem Three Houses. You can send a variety of units into battle. Each can equip many different weapon types, allowing them to learn skills associated with them. Players will not only face human armies, but also large beasts that take up multiple tiles on the board. In the event of an undesired outcome, the player has access to a rewind mechanic, allowing them to readjust an unfortunate scenario. And in between battles, the main character can even traverse across the base camp to converse with soldiers and train his army to fight at maximum proficiency. This is not to mention that Lost Eidolons managed to cast a not insignificant number of voice actors that just so happen to play character roles from Three Houses. I'm not saying it's abnormal or wrong for voice actors to take character roles within the same genre. I just find it hilarious that there are so many familiar performances that are also found in this game. And speaking of, props to the voice actors. I seriously wish them all to see a chiropractor in the near future, because they were all carrying the absolutely bewildering story presentation of this game on their backs the whole way. This game looks generic and nothing sticks out. I'm not saying the entire army should have been composed of rainbow hair teenagers, but nothing of the character designs do anything for me. The common character dialogues consist of stilted animation cycles over flat backgrounds, and even the more cinematic scenes display zero use of facial expression. There is always going to be something weirdly uncanny about whatever you're looking at. I can't say the story ever really captured my attention, but credit to where it's due, the actors sell the script as best they can. I actually kind of get why Eden is a naturally respected leader, because he does offer a strong charisma in his voice. But with the story discussed, let's focus on the elements of interactivity. So what's it like playing this video game? Well, it sure does play exactly like a Fire Emblem game. While there are some minor differences in the way magic is cast or putting units on horseback, there's nothing that feels too out of place. Gameplay is divided between player and enemy phases, where you can check the forecasts for your actions before performing them. Its overall challenge level can be a bit mixed. While I initially started the game on its hard mode difficulty, I actually found the missions to be just a bit too difficult. So a little bit into the game, I decided to turn the difficulty down to normal, where I then found the difficulty to be too easy for me. Now, despite the fact that I love these types of games, I'm certainly no tactics god, so it's possible someone else might find more enjoyment than I did in hard mode. But because the difficulty can only be lowered, never raised, I didn't find the exact balance that was most suited for me. I do like that no matter which difficulty you play, Lost Eidolons still puts a bit of pressure on you to play fast. For example, missions have a set turn limit at the start. Exceeding the limit will result in a game over, but the faster you can actually complete the main objective, the more bonus experience you'll be rewarded to further boost your levels. This certainly isn't a new concept for a tactics game to implement, but it's always appreciated no matter the title. But this game also makes a few interesting adjustments that create some challenge types which I haven't seen other SRPGs do to my knowledge. For instance, every attack has a 100% chance of inflicting damage. That's right, no one will ever miss in this game. In its place is a percentage chance to block an attack, which significantly reduces the damage you receive. This means you'll have to build strategies around the knowledge that every attack will hit you. It's not necessarily better than the more unpredictable hit rate system, but I can appreciate a game that shakes it up a bit. I'm also quite intrigued by the Zone of Danger system that prevents you from moving units past tiles that are adjacent to an enemy. It actually makes enemy soldiers an obstacle in your path that you have to deal with, and prevent some of the stupid shenanigans you could get away with in Three Houses. It can admittedly be a huge annoyance in the early game when your characters don't have a lot of movement to work with, but still, I applaud the team for trying it out. Enemy commanders can come with a buff that provides significantly more defense until you take out all the other soldiers in the army. It ensures the battles end on a climactic encounter, but it was also this inclusion which sort of recontextualized my intrigue with these new systems into something less exciting. The inclusion of these minor mechanics almost seemed to discourage or otherwise make impossible many typical strategies used in a low turn count playstyle. I understand what was probably going through the minds of the developers when creating these systems. I think they wanted to ensure that players would seriously engage with the map design and not just find ways to skip past everything. And in a way, it can almost be immersion breaking to see one or two units effortlessly clear out entire regiments of an army. And if I'm allowed to be blunt, I think these decisions were a mistake, or at the very least they overcorrected the problem to the point where the enjoyment of non-LTC playstyles are put at risk as well. Here's what I mean. There are plenty of maps where the objective is to kill the enemy commander, but since they usually have the defense buff, this means you'll have to kill all the other enemies in the battle anyway. Essentially, we have a rout the enemy map that is disguised as defeat the commander. Rout the enemy objectives can get quite tiring, especially in frequent succession, and the commander defense buff even removes some choice in how you may want to defeat all the enemies. Similarly, the Zone of Danger system also removes some choice on the player's part as they have to deal with the enemies immediately in front of them before moving on to the next objective. Hopefully I've been able to properly explain why I think this is a problem. Because the game includes mechanics that bring players towards a specific playstyle, it removes the possibility of other playstyles that could be used to play the game in an alternate way. Because those playstyles aren't possible, your options in trying a new approach on a future playthrough or even a future map are limited. I don't even feel incentivized to use other units, as you're forced to use the same 10 or so characters at the start of the game, ensuring that they'll probably be the best units the player has access to. Recruiting new members into your army is also a tedious process that requires doing a fetch quest for every potential candidate, and then showering them with the remaining gifts in your convoy until you reach the affinity threshold. And if you don't do this within the span of a couple chapters, then they're gone. So I don't see the appeal in ever replaying the game with different characters in the future. But it shouldn't matter who is in your party as long as you train them to fill the specific classes you desire for them, just like in Three Houses. But even that isn't well executed in Lost Eidolons. The thing that made Three Houses so enjoyable is that it allowed for near limitless possibilities when customizing your army for the upcoming playthrough. You had to decide which house of units you would start the game with. You then had to plan out which classes they would fit into, and then what skills they would learn in those classes. How those skills could then be applied to different classes to make the most of their abilities. Classes weren't restricted to a particular toolset, and students could learn different options at the same time. Lost Eidolons struggles to achieve that same level of depth and freedom. There aren't even opportunities to fight in optional battles unless they are tied to a side quest. So you don't even have the freedom to try out new builds or class combinations. You only unlock these management systems one feature at a time. So honestly, I try to treat this as a linear war campaign, just like many other Fire Emblem games that came before. But even then, the game isn't particularly enjoyable. The map design is repetitive and boring if I'm being honest. For a long stretch of the game, every map can be described as ramming castle gates in the beginning while trying to fend off an attack from archers. Then you proceed north while killing all the enemies in your path, before eventually reaching the enemy commander. There's just not enough diversity in map layouts and objectives to keep a steady interest level. Even the optional battles reuse the same 2 maps for every encounter. The most interesting maps are the ones where they subvert the expectations players might have had with the game. I do want to give Chapter 13 a special mention, as it's another castle siege map. However, instead of ramming the gates down, you bait the army outside of the walls to launch an ambush. It was a much needed change of pace, which was unfortunately the right move delivered far too late. If I have to be honest, Lost Eidolons is not a game that I would recommend. I didn't have an awful experience, and I think the game is actually decent all things considered. Anyone who picks this game up can rest assured they're getting a competently made SRPG. It's not an unpolished game, but I still found it to be boring. From all that I played, the game didn't have enough variety. To constantly have castle siege maps with the goal of routing every enemy just wore me out. The visual presentation is stiff at best and lifelessly uncanny at worst. The soundtrack doesn't pump me up or provide me with a satisfying complimentary mood. You could say the vibe was lacking. And when I can't foresee the game becoming more interesting on the horizon, then I know it's probably time to move on. If I have to give credit to the developers, they are clearly talented programmers and designers. My experience with the game, even before most of the patches and hotfixes, was mostly glitch-free. The game also doesn't fall into many potential pitfalls of poor user experience, as the gameplay flow is fast and can be played at double speed. And beyond that, while the game is heavily inspired by Three Houses, it does put in the effort to improve upon, or at least change aspects of the core design to distinguish itself. It's an effort that was done in good faith, even if it was ultimately unsuccessful in my eyes. What this team of creatives have is a basis for an excellent tactics game. I sincerely hope that Ocean Drive learned a lot of lessons from creating this game, because a follow-up or spiritual successor could be very well handled. But as it currently stands, Lost Eidolons is just kind of alright.